My husband had always been a good man. Steady, dependable, the kind of partner anyone would describe as solid. But somewhere along the way, things between us flattened. He worked long hours, came home exhausted, and barely noticed me beyond the routine. I didn't blame him, not entirely. Life had taken over. Still, I was lonely. The kind of loneliness that creeps in quietly and stays, even in a full house. His son from a previous marriage moved in with us during his university break. At first, I treated him like any responsible stepmother would. Respectful boundaries, polite conversation, nothing beyond the surface. But over time I noticed things. He'd matured. Not just physically, though he carried himself with confidence now, but in the way he listened, really listened, and in the subtle way he noticed things like when I changed my hair or wore a new color. It wasn't anything at first. Just brief glances across the room or a quick smile when he made a clever joke and saw me laugh. I dismissed the fluttering as ridiculous, selfish even. But those feelings didn't go away. A few weeks ago, my husband was supposed to take me out. Small date night, nothing fancy. But a work call came through, and just like that, the plans vanished. I tried not to show disappointment, but I felt it. I dressed up. I'd needed something to look forward to. His son noticed. Without hesitation, he said, "We can still go. I don't mind." I hesitated but said yes. I shouldn't have. We drove to the theater in silence at first, both pretending it was casual. Then we started talking about films, school, books, random things. It was easy, light, comfortable. Inside the theater it was cold, and I hadn't brought a jacket. He offered me his without a word, just placed it over my shoulders. It wasn't dramatic, but it meant something. During the movie, I became aware of everything. How close we were, the way our arms occasionally brushed. He leaned in once to whisper a joke, and I felt my skin react like I was 20 again. I laughed, maybe a little too loudly, a little too freely. I knew he noticed. I knew I didn't pull away. After the movie, we walked slowly back to the car. Neither of us said much, but the silence was charged. When he dropped me home, we lingered at the door. I thanked him and he smiled. Not like a stepson, not like a boy. It was subtle, but I saw it. Felt it. Lying in bed that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the evening. I kept asking myself why it felt like more than it should have. Nothing had happened, not really, but I felt guilty. Because I had wanted it to. Because for the first time in a long time, someone had looked at me like I wasn't invisible. And I wasn't sure I wanted to go back to being unseen. The next morning I told myself it was nothing. Just a movie. Just two people filling in a blank evening. But I couldn't ignore the tension that now lived in the spaces between us. He was careful, polite, kept his distance, but his eyes gave him away. He'd glance at me when he thought I wasn't looking. And worse, I kept catching myself doing the same. 3 days later, he knocked on my door and asked if I wanted to grab something sweet. He mentioned a dessert place nearby I'd once said I liked. Could have said no. Should have. But I didn't. We went. The drive was quiet at first, but not awkward. Then conversation picked up again, fluid and natural. He talked about his childhood, his mom's moods, how moving between homes shaped him. I listened, realizing how much he had held in over the years. There was something about the way he confided in me that felt intimate, like we were sharing a private understanding that didn't belong to anyone else. I said something about how strong he seemed, how mature. He smiled, almost sadly, and told me he never felt seen in either home, until now. I didn't know how to respond. My pulse quickened. I laughed too softly and looked away. That moment sat too long between us. We shared cake at a small booth, our hands brushing lightly as we passed the plate. I didn't pull mine back fast enough. Neither did he. The moment felt suspended. No one said anything. No move was made. But it didn't need to be. We both knew we were standing at the edge of something unspoken. The ride home was even quieter. Every red light felt like it held its breath. He parked the car and we sat in silence. He opened his mouth like he wanted to speak, then changed his mind. I thanked him for the night. He nodded, but there was a pause before he replied, like he wanted to say more but knew he shouldn't. Inside the house, the only sound was the hum of the fridge. My husband was asleep on the couch, his laptop open, a spreadsheet glowing faintly. I watched him for a moment. I should have felt anchored seeing him. I didn't. I just felt distant. He came into the kitchen to grab water, and I reached out, lightly touched his arm. Just to say goodnight. Just a casual touch. But I didn't remove my hand right away. He didn't step back. Eyes met. That brief second told the entire story we hadn't spoken. I left quickly, went upstairs, locked the door, lay down. My body was buzzing. My head was spinning. I told myself again nothing happened. It was just tension. It was nothing. But that was a lie. Something had broken open that neither of us knew how to close. I couldn't admit it aloud yet, but I'd crossed a line inside my mind, and deep down I knew what would come next. Days passed with an uneasy silence between us. We barely crossed paths, and when we did, it was all surface-level politeness. He stayed out more, came home later. I pretended it didn't bother me, but it did. His absence only deepened the ache I didn't want to admit was longing. My husband, still oblivious, buried himself in work. I told myself the space was good, that it gave me time to forget what I'd let grow. But the truth was, every quiet moment made me miss the connection more. One afternoon, a storm rolled in. My husband called to say he was staying overnight in another city for a work emergency. I didn't even question it. I just nodded at the phone like it mattered. Hours later I heard the door open. It was him. Soaked from the rain, dripping on the floor, and clearly frustrated. He hadn't expected the storm to hit while walking back from campus. I handed him a towel, told him to warm up. He took off his jacket, then pulled his shirt over his head without thinking. I turned away, then looked back. His back was to me, but the moment felt heavier than it should have. I offered tea, trying to steer things back to safe ground, but when I handed it to him, our fingers touched. I didn't move. Neither did he. He looked at me differently this time. Not curious, not uncertain, just direct. He asked if I was okay. He nodded. Then he asked if the other night meant anything to me. I hesitated. I wanted to lie, but the silence between us had already said too much. I told him I didn't know what I was feeling, that I was confused, that I hadn't felt anything this vivid in a long time. He stepped closer. I didn't back away. I should have. I didn't. He said I deserved to feel wanted, that it wasn't wrong to want to be seen. He didn't touch me at first. He just looked at me like he actually meant the words. Then it happened. Kiss. Hesitant, barely there, but real. I could have stopped it right there. Instead, I responded. It escalated quickly. Words disappeared. There was heat, hands, a blur of motion that felt both unreal and inevitable. We didn't speak during or after. It wasn't slow or romantic. It was desperate and quiet and fast. When it ended, I dressed without speaking. He sat on the edge of the bed, face blank, trying to understand what just happened. I told him it couldn't happen again. He nodded. I don't think either of us knew if we believed it. I went to my room, closed the door, and sat in the dark. There was no satisfaction, no thrill. Just the crashing realization of what I'd done. I hadn't just broken a vow. I'd broken something inside myself I couldn't name. The silence that followed was louder than anything else. The days that followed felt hollow. We avoided each other completely, moving around the house like strangers. I didn't blame him. There was nothing left to say. My husband returned the next morning, kissed my cheek like nothing had changed, and started telling me about his meeting. I nodded, answered when needed, but I was somewhere else entirely. Every word out of his mouth made my chest tighter. I looked at him and wondered how I could sit across from someone who trusted me so blindly. His son packed a bag a few days later. He said he needed to clear his head and wanted to spend time at his mom's. I didn't stop him. I didn't ask questions. I just watched him walk out, and that door closing felt heavier than it should have. I stood there alone, numb, unable to cry, unable to feel anything except a sick mix of regret and relief. I expected guilt, but it was something worse, shame. Not just for what I did, but for how easy it was to let it happen. I kept looking at myself in the mirror, trying to see what kind of woman could do something like that. There were no answers. I avoided my husband more. I slept earlier, pretended to be tired, avoided conversations. He noticed something was off, tried to ask once or twice, but I always gave him something vague and he didn't push. Maybe he didn't want to know. Maybe he could feel it too. One night he brought home flowers. Said he missed the way we used to be. He held my hand. I forced a smile. Thanked him. But I felt nothing. The distance between us wasn't just emotional anymore. It was a physical wall. I didn't deserve his kindness. And the worst part was knowing I couldn't fix it. I wasn't sure I even wanted to. The version of us we used to be had already died. His son didn't come back that summer. He didn't call, didn't message. I checked his social media once, then closed the app. He had erased me, and he was right to. I tried to tell myself it was a moment of weakness, that it didn't mean anything, but it wasn't true. It had meant something, and that's why it destroyed everything it touched. I never told my husband. Couldn't. It would have shattered him, and maybe I was a coward for choosing silence. But I also knew that confession wouldn't fix anything. It would just spread the damage further. So I carried it alone, every day, buried under a smile. I wish I could say I learned something noble from it all, but the truth is uglier. I acted out of hunger, out of selfishness, out of need. And now I live with the weight of knowing one night, one moment, one reckless decision, can carve a scar you never stop feeling. Even if no one else sees it, I feel it every time I look at myself. And I don't know if that will ever change.